What if everything you feared about demons was never about truth, but about control? What if the images burned into your childhood mind? Horns, red skin, flames licking through shadows, monstrous growls echoing from the darkness, were not warnings, but deliberate distractions. If that thought unsettles you, good. Because the very systems that taught you to fear are the ones that benefit from your ignorance. The truth is, you've been sold a lie. A massive, orchestrated deception meant to keep you asleep to your own energetic power. From the first moments you could understand language, you were surrounded by symbols. Symbols that told you what was good, what was evil, what was safe to trust, and what should be cast away. Every cartoon villain with glowing red eyes, every horror movie exorcism, every church sermon about eternal damnation, weaved the same myth into your subconscious. Demons are evil, they are to be feared, they must be avoided at all costs. But no one ever told you to question why that message was repeated so consistently. No one told you to consider who benefits from your fear of shadow, your fear of the dark, your fear of your own power. You see, fear is a weapon, and it's not always used to protect you. More often, it's used to program you. The institutions you've been taught to trust, education, religion, government, media, are not neutral. They are systems, structures built to maintain certain narratives, to preserve a certain order. And within that order, the most dangerous thing is a person who wakes up to their full energetic potential. A person who realizes that demons are not monsters hiding under the bed, but misunderstood frequencies, ancient intelligences that interact with your field depending on your level of coherence. That person becomes uncontrollable. If you look back through the history of spiritual teaching, you'll notice something strange. The more esoteric the path, the less dualistic its view of the universe becomes. Light and dark are no longer framed as good and evil, but as complements, necessary poles within a greater system of balance. But that idea never made it into the mainstream. Why? Because a balanced mind is hard to manipulate. A person who no longer fears their own darkness cannot be herded like sheep. So instead, you were taught that anything uncomfortable was dangerous, that demons were inherently malevolent, that darkness should be resisted, cast out, exorcised. But here's the truth, they never told you. What you resist persists, what you fear controls you, and what you demonize becomes a shadow so powerful it begins to define you. This isn't accidental, it's psychological warfare. Now think about it. Where did your first images of demons come from? Was it from a direct experience? A personal encounter? No. For most, it was fiction, stories, fairy tales, movies where possession is punishment, and only light can save you. These narratives are not neutral. They train your mind to respond to shadow with panic, to see unfamiliar energies as threats, to dissociate from your own primal power. That's not protection, that's programming. And the most insidious part? It's self-reinforcing. Once the belief is embedded, demons are evil, they must be avoided. Then, anytime you feel anxiety, pressure, a dark presence, or even a confronting emotion, your nervous system goes into panic. You try to escape it. But that panic itself is the energetic signature that invites further distortion. It's like a feedback loop. The more you fear the shadow, the more it grows in power, not because it's feeding on you like a monster, but because your own fear becomes the power source. You've probably never been told this. But the truth is, demons don't look for light to destroy. They look for incoherence. They look for chaos that's pretending to be clarity, for light that's performative, for people who wear spiritual masks but suppress their pain. And when they find that mismatch, that fracture, that energetic leak, they enter. Not always to torment. Often, just to reveal, to mirror what you're unwilling to see. But if you've been conditioned your whole life to see all darkness as evil, you'll never reach that insight. You'll run, you'll pray harder, you'll sage your house obsessively. And while none of those acts are wrong in themselves, when done from a place of fear, they become rituals of avoidance, not sovereignty. The problem isn't the ritual, it's the reason behind it. Because energy doesn't respond to dogma, it responds to structure. And if your internal structure is fractured by fear, no amount of external spiritual practice will truly shield you. This is why the narrative was built. Not to protect your soul, but to paralyze it. Because if you ever realized that these forces, these so-called demons, respond to coherence, that they retreat in the presence of integrated light and shadow, then you'd stop being afraid. And if you stopped being afraid, you'd start investigating. You'd begin to question. You'd notice that these energies don't show up at random, that they seem drawn to emotional loops, to suppressed grief, to repressed rage. You'd begin to understand that demons are not enemies, they are energetic mechanisms, part of a larger system of regulation, a system designed not to punish you, but to pressure you into integration. So when you were told that demons are evil, that they must be avoided, rebuked, or feared, you weren't just being misled, you were being disempowered. Because the moment you externalize the shadow, you make it unclaimable. You make it something that must be fought, not understood. And that keeps you stuck. It keeps you spiritually obedient, afraid of your own power, afraid of your rage, your sexuality, your grief. Afraid of your primal intelligence, the part of you that sees in the dark, that feels when something is watching, that knows when you're being tested. That part of you was never meant to be cut off. But religion told you it was sin. Psychology told you it was trauma. Society told you it was irrational. And all three taught you to silence it. But silence is not sovereignty. Integration Island, the truth is, the more you try to deny the dark, the more it owns you. Not because it's evil, but because you've given it all your power. You've made it the villain in your story, the thing that must be avoided at all costs. And in doing so, you've made it the one thing you cannot face. That's the lie. That's the trap. That's the real possession. But here's what they didn't want you to know. The moment you stop running, the moment you look into the eyes of the thing you were taught to fear, and simply see it, everything changes. Because darkness isn't what corrupts. Denial Island. And what you bring into awareness, you can reclaim. What you integrate, you can command. What you understand, you can alchemize. This isn't about glorifying darkness, it's about telling the truth. The light isn't stronger because it shines louder. It's stronger when it no longer hides from shadow. And you, the one watching this, have always known there was more to the story. You've felt it. In the pit of your stomach, in the echoes of your dreams, in the heat behind your ribs, when no one else could explain why you were afraid of things you couldn't see. That knowing wasn't madness, it was memory. You've been sold a story that kept you scared, but now, you're beginning to rewrite it, not with fantasy, but with frequency. Because you don't defeat demons by pretending they don't exist. You transcend them by becoming the one thing they cannot manipulate, whole. And that, right there, is where your power begins. What if I told you that demons don't appear because you summoned them through words or symbols, but because something in your energy whispered their name without you even knowing it? What if the true ritual isn't made of candles and circles and chants, but of the frequency you hold when no one is watching? You see, it's not about summoning, it's about resonance. You don't attract these forces by invoking them, you attract them by vibrating at the frequency they recognize. And the truth that most people never realize is this: they're not intruding, they're responding. Every single thought you suppress, every emotion you refuse to feel, every memory you bury beneath performance creates a subtle signal. It doesn't matter what you say aloud, your field is always speaking. It speaks in grief you've never named, in rage you swallow behind politeness, in shame, so old you've forgotten its source. That's the language these forces respond to. They don't come because you're doing something wrong, they come because there's an echo in your field, and it matches theirs. You've been taught that spiritual attacks are random, that darkness just descends out of nowhere. But real attacks don't begin from outside, they begin inside, in the unresolved, in the ignored. In the pieces of you that you've been taught to spiritualize away instead of integrate. When you suppress anger, it doesn't disappear. It simmers beneath the surface, creating heat signatures in your field that ripple outward. And those ripples attract attention, not from evil beings trying to destroy you, but from intelligent frequencies scanning the grid for resonance. You don't need to call them, you already are. The universe doesn't function on human morality, it functions on frequency. Resonance is the sorting mechanism of reality. Like attracts like. Not because of karma, or reward, or punishment, but because vibration follows law. It harmonizes with what reflects its pattern. And when your inner world is holding unspoken chaos, distortion begins to form. That distortion becomes a beacon, and that beacon is what invites the shadow in. Now, here's the truth you won't hear from most. Demons don't show up in your life because you're cursed. They show up because your field is activated. They arrive because your energy is carrying signals that echo across dimensions. And when that signal matches their bandwidth, contact happens. But the contact is never random. It's mathematical, it's vibrational, it's precise. You don't summon them with words. You summon them with coherence, or lack of it. This is why two people can walk into the same haunted house, and only one sees something in the corner of the room. Why one person can hear voices in the dark while another feels nothing at all. It's not about belief, it's about bandwidth. These entities don't care what you think you know. They read what you are. They scan for incoherence, for patterns of avoidance, for souls who are leaking energy through trauma loops and unresolved grief. And when they find that, they don't knock, they enter. Not because they're violating your space, but because you left the door open by vibrating on their level. Let's talk about what that really means. Because this isn't about blaming yourself for being in pain. This is about understanding that pain, when repressed, becomes a tuning fork. Unspoken grief becomes a magnet. Suppressed shame turns into a resonance chamber. And these states of being emit signals, complex, layered frequencies that can be felt far beyond the visible world. You might walk through life with a smile, a well-curated sense of calm, even a spiritual vocabulary, but if underneath that, you're silently drowning, they'll know, and they'll come. But not always to harm. Sometimes they come simply because that's what they do. They respond. They test the boundaries of your field the same way waves test the strength of a shoreline, not to destroy it, but to reveal where it's still soft, still eroding. And that's the part most people misunderstand. They think an attack means they're under siege. But what if the attack isn't punishment? What if it's a signal, an alarm that your field is out of sync, that you're carrying unprocessed energy that needs to be acknowledged? The entities you fear don't need to break in. They wait. They wait for the right frequency. And that frequency doesn't come from your mind, it comes from your body, your field, your unresolved experience. That's the ritual. That's the invocation. Not the spell you recite, but the shame you haven't spoken, the fear you refuse to feel, the pattern you keep repeating because it's safer than facing yourself. That's what they recognize. That's what draws them close. Think about a time when things in your life started to feel off. Maybe it was a sudden heaviness, a string of bad dreams, a sharp drop in energy for no clear reason. Most people try to spiritualize it, or escape it, or pray it away. But very few stop and ask, what frequency am I carrying right now? Because if you truly understood that your field is a broadcast tower, you'd realize you're never just experiencing life, you're transmitting it. You are always sending signals. And those signals are always being answered. You might not like the answer, you might feel haunted, but haunting is just a message that something unacknowledged is speaking. It's not random, it's relational. These forces don't hover around healthy, coherent fields. They don't bother with souls that are integrated and grounded. That's not a moral statement, that's a vibrational one. They're not evil, they're efficient, and they conserve energy by seeking fields they can resonate with. So when you feel them near, ask yourself, not, why are they attacking me, but, what part of me is still echoing in distortion? Because here's what happens when you shift that question. You stop being a victim of energy. You become a participant in it. And in that shift, everything changes. You begin to notice the way your emotions create patterns in your field. You start to observe how certain thoughts, certain memories, even certain places, carry a frequency that lingers long after the moment passes. And most importantly, you start to recognize your power, not as defense, but as design. You don't control demons by casting them out. You shift their influence by changing your signal. That's the part you were never told. Because if you knew that your frequency is the real summoning circle, you'd stop externalizing the cause of your suffering. You'd stop blaming the shadows and start illuminating the fractures. You'd take responsibility not from guilt, but from understanding. And that kind of understanding creates a different resonance, one that repels manipulation and dissolves fear. So ask yourself right now, what am I broadcasting? Not what am I saying, not what am I pretending to be, but what am I actually vibrating with? Is it grief? Is it unspoken anger? Is it abandonment so deep it echoes through your bones? Whatever it is, that's the portal. That's the code. And until you bring it into awareness, it will keep calling out on your behalf. You don't need to light a candle to make contact. You already have. The question is, what frequency are you using to speak? Because once you understand that demons don't answer to language, but to energy, you stop trying to cast them out with force. You begin to meet them with presence, and in that presence, they pause, they hesitate, because the one thing they cannot manipulate is coherence. The frequency that calls them can also clear them, and that frequency is yours. What if I told you that some of the most powerful agreements you've ever made were never spoken, never written, never even consciously chosen? What if, without realizing it, you've signed invisible contracts with energies you barely understand, contracts sealed not with ink, but with avoidance, repression, and fear? These aren't contracts you agree to with your mind, they're ones you broadcast through your energy. And every time you suppress your truth, silence your pain, or pretend to be whole when you're splintered inside, you stamp your signature onto a vibrational page. You don't remember signing it, but your field does. And the forces that respond to that frequency, they remember it too. We like to think of boundaries as walls, something we set with words or willpower. But the deeper truth is, boundaries begin in the energy body. They are shaped by clarity or collapsed by chaos. When your emotions are unresolved, when your shadow remains unintegrated, your field becomes porous, like a house with open windows during a storm. It's not a matter of if something will come in, it's a matter of when. And when that happens, it doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like an invasion. But it isn't. It's a response, not because you're being punished, but because energy follows the openings we create, whether we're aware of them or not. Emotional repression isn't harmless, it's not strength, it's a form of fragmentation, and fragmentation radiates confusion into the energetic matrix. Think of it this way. Every time you bury a feeling, you split off a piece of yourself. That piece doesn't disappear, it lives in your field, unprocessed, vibrating like an unattended frequency. That unattended frequency becomes an access point, an energetic doorway, and just like a room left open with a light on in the night, it calls to whatever frequencies match its tone. Shame, grief, anger, betrayal, none of these emotions are wrong. But when denied, they begin to act as invitations, not because they are bad in themselves, but because your resistance to them creates the very signature that draws in the shadow. That's where shadow contracts are born, not in dark rituals or deliberate invocations, but in subtle, unconscious agreements made when you try to escape from what you feel. If you were taught that feeling rage is dangerous, you likely buried it early on. But that suppression didn't erase the rage, it turned it into a hidden fire, flickering beneath your surface. That fire emits a frequency, and that frequency matches forces that know how to manipulate it. You didn't ask for their presence in words, you asked in signal, and they answered. Fear works the same way. When you're terrified of being alone, being abandoned, being unworthy, but you never face it, never name it, that fear doesn't dissolve, it echoes. And the echo becomes an energetic beacon. You might pray for peace, beg for protection, surround yourself with light. But if your field is humming with the vibration of fear, the universe reads that as your dominant frequency, and so do the entities that move through its deeper currents. You can say you want sovereignty, but if your energy is pleading for rescue, it's not sovereignty you're aligned with, it's victimhood, and that becomes a contract. Contracts aren't always made with malice, often they're born of misunderstanding. No one taught you that energy speaks louder than intention. No one showed you how the invisible architecture of your being becomes a map that others can read, forces seen and unseen. You were never told that saying, "I'm fine," when you're breaking inside creates a distortion so loud it becomes a flare in the ether. And that flare, that fracture, is what they look for. Because just like parasites seek wounds, energetic beings seek incoherence. not because they're evil, but because incoherence is a signal of access. The darkest agreements are the ones you never knew you made. Like the moment you swore you'd never be angry like your father, so you buried every trace of your fury. Or the time you decided vulnerability was weakness, so you silenced your grief and wore strength like armor. Each time you reject a part of yourself, you make space for something else to take its place. Not because you invited it directly, but because you created a vacuum, and the universe does not tolerate vacuums. Something always fills the void. This is how shadow entities operate. They don't break in, they fill in. They don't hijack your life by brute force. They slip through the cracks you've tried not to see. They enter not through doors, but through denials. Through the parts of yourself you've pushed away so long they no longer have a voice. And so, something else speaks in their place. What's terrifying is how subtle it can be. One day you feel drained, then anxious, then confused about your own desires. Your inner compass feels scrambled. You start sabotaging things you once loved. And instead of looking inward, you assume something is out to get you. But what if it's not out to get you? What if it's simply responding to the field you've unconsciously shaped? This is not about blame, it's about reclamation. Because once you see the hidden contracts for what they are, you can begin to dissolve them. And the way to dissolve them is not through exorcism or warfare. It's through integration. You don't fight the shadow by pushing it away harder. You free yourself from it by facing the parts of yourself you've abandoned, by welcoming back the rage, the fear, the sorrow, not as enemies, but as messengers. And when you do, the energy shifts, the field closes, the signature disappears, because there's no longer a resonance for the entity to hook into. These beings are governed by energetic law. They aren't chaotic, they're precise. If your field no longer carries the pattern they're drawn to, they have nothing to respond to. The contract ends, not in fire and fury, but in silence, in presence, in you becoming whole again. But here's the most important part. The contract cannot end if you refuse to acknowledge it. You cannot break what you haven't owned. That means telling yourself the truth, not the truth your ego wants to hear, but the deeper truth your energy has always known. The truth that maybe you've used spirituality as a way to bypass pain, that maybe your light was a performance while your shadow screamed for recognition, that maybe the attack wasn't an attack at all, but an amplification of the very wounds you tried to bury. These realizations don't make you weak, they make you powerful, because once you realize how much of your experience has been shaped by hidden agreements, you become free to write new ones. Not from fear, but from clarity. You begin to live in such a way that your field says, "I know who I am," instead of, "Please don't hurt me." And that statement, that coherence, is what real protection feels like. No more pretending, no more avoidance, just presence. And in that presence, you take back authorship. You reclaim every piece of yourself you gave away in exchange for safety. You tear up every silent agreement that said, "I'll stay small if you just leave me alone." And you replace it with one new law. I am whole. I am aware. I remember. And in that remembering, you become unreadable to the forces that once fed on your forgetting. Because now, there is nothing hidden, nothing unspoken, nothing left in the shadows for them to claim. The contract is broken, and you didn't need a sword to do it. You needed the truth. What if I told you that demons don't respond to how scared you are, how spiritual you sound, or how much you beg for protection? What if they don't care about your prayers, your panic, or your passion, but they do care about your structure? It might sound cold, even unsettling, to realize that the most feared entities in the unseen world don't operate on emotion, they operate on law. Not human law, not religious law, but energetic law. A deeper order, precise, impersonal, and unwavering. And in that system, coherence is everything. Coherence isn't how good you are, it's how whole you are. And when your field is coherent, you don't just survive in the presence of darkness, you command it. You see, most people think power is emotional. They think if they feel strong enough, shout loud enough, or believe hard enough, they'll be safe. But energy doesn't care about noise. It cares about alignment. You could recite every protective mantra in existence, but if your energy field is chaotic, leaky, or fragmented, those words will be empty. The unseen realms don't recognize performance. They recognize frequency. And frequency doesn't lie. This is where the law of energetic gravity begins to reveal itself. Just as the physical world obeys gravity without exception, the energetic world obeys coherence. It's the invisible force that determines who becomes the center of their own field and who becomes vulnerable to forces beyond it. A coherent being becomes a gravitational node, an anchor in the energetic matrix. Not because they're forceful, but because they're integrated. Every part of them is accounted for. No splinters, no denial, no hidden wounds leaking unconscious fear into the space around them. That kind of being bends the energetic field around them, not out of dominance, but out of balance. Now, contrast that with someone who appears strong on the surface, but is riddled with internal contradiction. They might speak affirmations, but secretly hate themselves. They might preach love, but are consumed by resentment. They might be admired publicly, but rot with self-doubt when alone. That person's field is incoherent, not because they are bad, but because they are divided, and division weakens gravity. A fragmented field becomes loose, disorganized, and vulnerable. It attracts exactly what it cannot hold. Just like a planet with a disrupted gravitational core begins to wobble, to lose mass, to become unstable, so too does the incoherent being draw attention from energies that seek unclaimed territory. This is why certain people seem haunted, while others walk through darkness untouched. It's not about light versus dark, it's about clarity versus confusion. Demons do not obey moral hierarchies. They don't attack based on goodness or badness. They respond to density, to openings in your auric field, to dissonance between what you claim and what you carry. If you radiate one truth while living another, you are broadcasting an invitation, not because you deserve to be attacked, but because you're out of sync, and out of sync beings become targets, not out of cruelty, but by the law of energetic gravity. And here's the most sobering truth. The more you try to protect yourself without integrating your shadow, the more you split your field. You create a duality between who you are and who you pretend to be. That split is where distortion begins. It becomes a fault line in your energy, a soft spot where pressure builds. The moment something powerful passes near, it doesn't attack you. It presses on the weak point, and whatever hasn't been made whole will crack. But this doesn't have to be a weakness. It can be a compass, because every crack reveals where your energy needs to be reclaimed. Every pressure point becomes a doorway to integration. And with each piece you call back, each emotion you stop running from, each memory you finally feel instead of flee, you strengthen your field, you stop leaking energy, you stop broadcasting contradiction, and in that stillness, in that alignment, your gravity begins to shift. You've probably felt this before, even if you didn't have the words for it. You've met people who seem to radiate something deeper than charisma. They don't need to speak loudly to command a room. They don't perform spiritual wisdom, they are it. Their presence is felt before their words are heard. That's not charm, that's coherence. It's what happens when someone becomes fully themselves, nothing hidden, nothing fragmented. And entities, especially the darker ones, respond to that presence with respect, not because they fear it, but because they cannot destabilize it. Coherence is like a seal, a perfect alignment between mind, body, and field. It creates a gravitational pull that not only protects, but organizes the space around it. That's why some beings aren't just untouched by darkness, they reshape it. They walk into spaces others are afraid of, and shift the frequency just by being there. Not because they're saints, but because they're whole. Becoming a gravitational node doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming honest. Brutally, beautifully honest with yourself about what you've been avoiding, who you've been pretending to be, and where your power has been scattered. It means calling back the pieces of you left behind in trauma, in heartbreak, in fear. It means feeling what you didn't want to feel, so you can reclaim the part of you that was frozen there. Each time you do, you reinforce your core, you deepen your gravity, and slowly, the energies that once hovered around you out of chaos now orbit you out of recognition. This is how you shift from being a target to becoming a command point. You don't fight off demons, you become unreadable to them, not by shielding yourself in false light, but by becoming light through the shadow. You stop being a point of access when your field stops broadcasting dissonance. And the only way to stop broadcasting dissonance is to integrate what's been denied. That's why incoherent fields become targets. Because incoherence is instability, and instability becomes opportunity for entities that feed on division, not evil ones, not monsters. Just intelligent energies moving along pathways of least resistance. They don't care why you're broken, they just recognize that you are, and until you stop spiritualizing your wounds and start healing them, they'll keep returning, not as punishment, but as a message. You don't need louder rituals or stronger shields, you need structure, inner gravity. A field that no longer wobbles with every emotion you resist or truth you refuse. Coherence isn't glamorous. It's built in silence, in solitude, in the slow, sometimes painful work of self-honesty. But it changes everything, because when you reach that level of inner structure, when your energy no longer flickers in contradiction, nothing outside of you can command you. You become the command. Not in arrogance, not in defiance, but in stillness. You radiate such profound alignment that anything unaligned must either adapt, leave, or dissolve. That is the power of energetic gravity. And that is the law these beings obey. Whether you believe in them or not, whether you acknowledge them or not, whether you're ready or not. Because frequency doesn't wait for your permission. It simply answers the question your field is already asking. So ask wisely, align deliberately, and let your coherence speak the language they cannot ignore. What if I told you that the reason your life has felt like a battlefield isn't because you're cursed, but because you're chosen, not in the way the world romanticizes it, but in the way that feels raw, brutal, and relentless? You've walked through fire most people only read about. You've faced breakdowns that shattered you into pieces, only to rise again without a manual, without applause, without a finish line. And just when you thought it was over, another wave came. Another test, another shadow, another voice telling you you're not enough. But what if all of it wasn't a punishment? What if it was calibration? The path of the chosen one is not glamorous, it's grueling. It's not about titles or spiritual superiority, it's about capacity. And capacity is built through pressure. Not light pressure, but crushing, soul-bending weight that breaks everything false inside you so that only the truth remains. The ones who are called to hold more light are first made to face more shadow. That's not poetic, that's law. You can't carry high frequency unless your container has been forged in heat, and the heat you've felt, that burn of betrayal, of loss, of depression that wraps itself around your bones, isn't failure. It's the fire that melts everything in you that isn't stable enough to last. You weren't born into a gentle life because you weren't made for shallow waters. You carry codes most people will never understand, keys that don't activate in comfort. And that's why demons don't ignore you. They notice you, because your field flickers with potential they recognize, even if you don't. It's not that they hate you, it's that they're drawn to your becoming, not to stop it, but to test it. Because testing is how truth proves itself. They don't need to torture the ones who stay asleep. What's the point? But the ones who show signs of awakening, those are the ones who become pressure points in the system. You've probably asked yourself why your path seems harder than others. Why people with less depth seem to live easier lives. Why every step forward seems to be met with resistance. It's not random. It's the signature of your soul's voltage. You're carrying frequencies that challenge the illusion, and that makes you a threat, not just to systems of control, but to the parts of yourself still clinging to comfort, to safety, to smallness. That inner tension creates friction, and friction calls in force. But again, it's not here to destroy you, it's here to reveal what still needs to die in you, before the real you can fully rise. Demons, in this context, are not captors, they are catalysts. They don't care about tormenting you for fun. They apply pressure in precise places. They push on your unhealed wounds. They amplify your internal noise. They press up against your belief systems until something gives. And in that cracking, what most people call a breakdown, you begin to see what's real. You realize the relationship wasn't love, the job wasn't purpose, the persona wasn't truth. And it hurts. Gods, it hurts. But on the other side of that pain is clarity, and clarity is the beginning of power. You're not cursed. You're being carved. The difference between the two lies in your perspective. A curse feels like senseless chaos. Calibration feels like a pattern, one that's painful, but with purpose. Think about the moments in your life that hurt the most. Now look closer. Each one was followed, eventually, by a deeper level of awareness. A layer of ego dropped, a shift in direction, a new layer of discernment. That's not coincidence, that's alchemy. And what if the demons you feared were not there to consume you, but to force the transformation you kept avoiding? What if they appear at the exact moment your soul is ready to evolve, but your personality is still resisting? That inner tug-of-war creates vulnerability, and into that vulnerability steps a force. Not as an enemy, but as a mirror, a teacher, a tester. Their lesson isn't, "You are weak," it's, "Will you finally stop pretending?" They're not here to end you, they're here to strip the false layers so the truth of you has no choice but to rise. That's why the chosen are tested the most. Because the role isn't about privilege, it's about pressure. It's about walking with integrity when no one is watching. It's about choosing truth over validation, presence over performance, alignment over applause. That level of inner sovereignty is not granted, it's earned. And it's earned through every moment you wanted to give up but didn't. Through every night you cried out for help and no one came, but something inside you kept breathing. That thing, whatever it is, it's not weakness. It's the core of you that cannot be extinguished. And that's why the shadows test you. Because they want to know, are you ready to stop pretending you're powerless? Pressure refines you. It strips away your spiritual ego. It shatters the parts of you that wanted healing without discomfort, growth without challenge, wisdom without cost. The real path doesn't offer comfort, it offers clarity. And clarity is often earned through fire. Not the fire that destroys, but the fire that purifies. That's why everything is harder for you. Not because you did something wrong, but because you are being shaped into someone who can't be moved by surface-level storms. Your pain has a pattern, your wounds have meaning. You are not just enduring, you are becoming. And the forces that have pressed against you have not done so to crush you, but to calibrate your strength. Because there are places your soul is meant to go that require a foundation no storm can shake. So the storms come early, and they come often, until nothing false can remain. You might not see it now, but the pressure is crafting something exquisite in you, a presence, a coherence, a gravity that cannot be faked. And when that inner alignment is strong enough, the very energies that once tested you will shift. They will still appear, but not to torment you. They will orbit you like sentinels, no longer invasive, but observant. Because the law they obey is not dominance, it is coherence. And coherence is the language of command. You're not crazy, you're not weak, you're not under attack, you're in training. You are being stripped of everything that cannot survive the next level of your evolution. That's what this path demands. And yes, it's lonely. Yes, it's hard. But no, you are not alone. Others are walking this same path, quietly, invisibly, feeling the same fire, passing the same tests. And when your energy reaches the threshold, when your field no longer flinches at challenge, you'll feel them. The others, the ones who didn't break, the ones who remembered why they came. So no, you're not cursed. You're being calibrated. For something bigger than comfort, for a life bigger than ease, for a mission that doesn't announce itself with trumpets, but whispers in your bones. Keep going, you're almost there. What if I told you that there's a current running beneath everything you know? A dark, pulsing undercurrent that's not evil, but raw, primal, and vastly misunderstood. It's not the kind of darkness you've been warned about. It's not possessed by malice or chaos. It's a frequency, an ancient rhythm embedded in the bones of the universe itself. And the ones who learn to ride it? They're not fearless, they're structured. They don't command respect because they shine the brightest, but because they can hold the weight of the current without collapsing. This is the secret mystics have whispered across centuries, not in temples or books, but in initiation chambers and silence. There is a dark current, and it does not belong to the wicked, it belongs to the initiated. You've been taught that darkness is synonymous with danger, that anything not drenched in light must be purged or avoided. But what if that's not true? What if, instead of being your enemy, the shadow, is a force you were always meant to master. The ancient ones didn't run from darkness. They didn't try to conquer it with light, or banish it with mantras. They entered it, deliberately, reverently, because they knew something the modern world has forgotten. Within the dark lies the deepest source of transformation. Not the chaos of unbound pain, but the aligned shadow that holds the key to real power. That's the difference. And that difference is everything. Chaotic darkness is what most people fear. It's the wild, unpredictable force that consumes anything without a stable center. It latches onto incoherence and feeds on fragmentation. It's reactive, volatile, and spiraling. But aligned shadow, that's different. Aligned shadow is coherent. It's intentional. It doesn't react. It responds. It doesn't destroy. It purifies. It's the teacher that shows up when the student stops pretending to be good and starts becoming real. Aligned shadow doesn't hate the light, it respects it, because true light only has weight when it's been tested by shadow and hasn't flinched. This is the razor's edge that few are willing to walk, the space where power is no longer an idea but a responsibility, where your presence alone changes a room, not because you're loud, but because your energy is anchored in both light and dark, without being owned by either. It's not easy. This path doesn't care about your ego's desire for spiritual identity. It burns through image, it tears apart personas, and in its place, it leaves something far more rare: presence. Not the kind you perform, but the kind that is felt by every being around you, seen and unseen. Those who surf the dark current don't do so because they seek destruction. They do it because they've understood that to be truly sovereign, you must be able to stand in the storm and not become it. You must be able to touch darkness without losing your frequency. That's the mark of someone who has done the real work, not just the work of healing wounds, but of integrating every single piece of their being, no fragment left behind, no part of self exiled for the comfort of a clean image. The dark current will find your fractures, not to punish you, but to expose you. It does not negotiate with illusion. If there's ego hiding behind your spiritual practice, it will shatter it. If you're still afraid of your own anger, your own sexuality, your own grief, the current will draw it out and place it before you like a test. Because until you can look at all of yourself without flinching, you will never be able to command your energy. And if you cannot command your energy, something else will. This is why the ones who truly walk this path don't seek attention. They don't need to. Their gravity speaks for them. Their structure is their shield. The dark forces they've danced with don't stalk them anymore. They observe them, not out of fear, but out of recognition. There's a silent nod given to the soul who has passed through fire without losing their song. A kind of mutual awareness, like predators who understand they're no longer hunting prey, but meeting a peer. To surf the dark current is not to become consumed by shadow, but to become fluent in its language. It's knowing the pulse of chaos without being ruled by it. It's hearing the scream of 1,000 unhealed ancestors in your blood, and responding not with panic, but with poise. It's standing in front of what once terrified you and realizing, it's not here to devour you. It's here to reveal you. To show you what's left of your identity that still believes you need to be saved. There's a power in that space. But it's not for the uninitiated. It's not for those still seeking approval, still addicted to being seen as light bearers. Because the dark current will always test your integrity. You can't fake structure here. You can't pretend you've integrated your shadow when you're still bypassing your trauma with mantras and crystals. The current reads your field like a code. And if your foundation is weak, it will pull you under, not to drown you, but to force you to remember how to breathe from your center. This is why those who walk this edge tend to be quiet. Their words are measured, their gaze is deep. They don't talk about enlightenment, they embody weight. They've been through things they can't explain to people who haven't faced the void. Not because they're better, but because they've seen something. They've made peace with forces that most people pray to be protected from. They've learned that demons aren't always enemies. Sometimes they're gatekeepers. Guardians of power that will only open when the one who approaches knows who they are, completely. And make no mistake, walking this path is not about avoiding danger. It's about developing the capacity to be in danger and remain in alignment. It's about becoming the kind of being that chaos respects. Not because it can't destroy you, but because you no longer carry anything inside you that agrees with destruction. You've integrated the shadow, you've emptied the vessel. There is no leverage point left. That's real power. And that's the invitation of the dark current, not to worship darkness, not to become seduced by it, but to stop fearing it, to step into its flow with the kind of inner stillness that cannot be shaken. To surf it, not because you crave control, but because you have surrendered to the law that governs it, coherence, structure, presence, and so the darkness becomes a mirror, not of your fear, but of your mastery, not a threat, but a test, a confirmation that your light is no longer performative, no longer fragile, but earned, embodied, and undeniable, not because you shouted it into the world, but because even the shadow bowed when you walked in. What if I told you that the feeling of being watched isn't in your head, that strange pressure on the back of your neck when you're alone, the shift in the room's energy, the sudden chills for no reason, they aren't paranoia, they're perception. Because when your frequency sharpens, when your signal stabilizes, when your field stops flickering and starts transmitting with power and clarity, the watchers begin to circle. Not to harm you, but to observe, to measure, to recognize. You are not imagining the presence. You're resonating at a frequency that draws attention from forces that have always been here, waiting for someone like you to come online. You've probably felt it for years, maybe since you were a child. That strange sense of being different, of being seen even when no one is looking. That unshakable feeling that your life was under a microscope, as if someone, was tracking your growth. It's not delusion, it's recognition. Because certain souls carry codes that light up across dimensions when activated. These codes don't come alive through reading books or attending workshops. They come online through suffering, silence, and the slow, brutal process of integration. And when that activation happens, your signal goes live. It broadcasts into a field far more intelligent and aware than you've been taught to believe, and that field responds. Not all watchers are the same. Some observe out of curiosity, others out of concern. Some test your boundaries, not out of malice, but because they're drawn to new frequency signatures and want to understand what you're becoming. And others, quieter, older, simply witness. They've seen this pattern before. A soul waking up inside the density, trying to remember while still surviving the weight of forgetting. To them, your signal is not a threat, it's a phenomenon, a broadcast that something rare is taking shape in a world built on repetition. This is why you've felt followed. Why dreams loop, why the same symbols repeat in strange places, why the air shifts in empty rooms. These are not glitches, they're signals. Confirmations that your presence has been noted. Because in the subtle realms, when you shift your frequency, your presence doesn't just change your life, it changes your signature. And that signature becomes visible across timelines, across dimensions. You are no longer invisible, you're readable. And not all energies take that lightly. You might start noticing more synchronicities, more repeating numbers, more electronic disturbances, more sensations of being on the edge of something unseen. It doesn't mean you're losing it. It means you're coming online. Your nervous system might feel overloaded, your sleep disrupted, your thoughts tangled in strange loops. These are symptoms of being perceived, not by other people, but by the field itself. The intelligence within the matrix that tracks signals like yours, waiting to see, will you stabilize, or will you collapse? Because most don't make it past the initial wave. The pressure of being perceived is too much. The old self begins to fracture, and instead of integrating, they panic. They spiritualize the experience into paranoia, or they shut it down entirely, retreating into numbness. But you haven't. You're still here, still sensing, still listening. That's why the watchers haven't turned away. Because you're sustaining the signal. You might feel watched in your dreams, eyes on you from corners that never reveal a face. You might see patterns in the way people suddenly appear, track your words, mirror your energy. It's not coincidence. It's alignment. You are not just participating in reality anymore. You are shaping it. And when you do that, reality starts paying attention. The watchers don't only exist in the shadow. There are benevolent intelligences observing your development as well. Forces aligned with coherence, with sovereignty, with transformation. They monitor, not to interfere, but to witness, because every soul that activates in truth sends ripples through the grid, and those ripples are felt by others like you. This is how the network finds itself. Not through algorithms or social structures, but through energetic broadcasting. You are not alone in this, even when it feels like it. Others are watching too, not in surveillance, but in recognition. They've been waiting for your signal, and the signal is not your Instagram feed. It's not your branding, it's your field, your actual electromagnetic presence, the way your system stabilizes under pressure, the way your choices remain aligned even in silence. That's what gets noticed. That's what turns the watchers' heads. The feeling of being observed intensifies as you begin to collapse your fragmentation, when your inner dialogue gets quieter, when your energy stops contradicting itself, when your light is no longer performative but present. That's when the deeper forces tune in, not because you're special, but because you're becoming whole. Being watched doesn't always feel comforting. Sometimes it triggers old trauma, old wounds from surveillance, from punishment, from being seen but not loved. But this kind of watching isn't about judgment. It's about frequency recognition. It's the cosmic version of a lighthouse being noticed across the sea. You're emitting something, and what you're emitting is strong enough to be felt across layers of consciousness that most people never touch. This is why you must learn to sit in stillness without panicking, to feel the presence in the room and not flinch, to sense the awareness observing you and not spiral into fear, because fear scrambles your frequency. It makes your signal incoherent, and incoherence draws in chaos. But stillness creates clarity. It stabilizes your field, and that stability is what sets the terms of the interaction. You are not powerless in the face of this attention. You are sovereign. But sovereignty must be claimed, not assumed. It must be lived, not declared. When you embody coherence, you don't repel watchers. You define the context. You set the tone. You determine whether their presence becomes interference or amplification. Some of these forces will test you, not to break you, but to measure you, to see if your signal is consistent under pressure. If your light flickers when challenged, that's not cruelty, that's calibration. The field is watching to see what kind of being you're becoming. So when you feel it again, when the room feels thicker, the dreams get stranger, the timing too perfect to be chance, remember, this isn't paranoia, this is perception. You are not being stalked. You are being acknowledged. Your energy is no longer small enough to go unnoticed. And that is not a curse, it's confirmation. You've sharpened your signal. You've pierced the veil. And now, the veil is looking back. Let it. Let it see you in your truth. Let it measure your coherence. Let it feel your gravity. Because in the end, it's not about escaping their gaze. It's about standing in it, calm, aligned, unshaken, and realizing, I am not afraid to be seen, because now, I remember who I am. What if I told you that when they come closer, it's not a sign of danger, it's a sign of readiness? That presence you've felt tightening around your energy field isn't there to destroy you. It's there to read you. Not through words, but through vibration. Not through fear, but through resonance. Because the moment your signal becomes coherent, you don't just emit frequency. You declare availability. You don't have to summon anything. Your state of being becomes the call. And in that call, entities that were once distant begin to draw near, not to feed, not to frighten, but to assess. They want to see if you're ready. You've felt this shift. There was a time when your chaos repelled them, when your emotional instability kept your field too distorted to be of interest. Back then, if they appeared, it was to press on your fractures, to amplify the cracks in your foundation, to test whether your identity would hold under pressure. And most of the time, it didn't. That's not failure, that's stage one. But now you're not the same. Your energy has stabilized. Your shadows are no longer buried, they're acknowledged. Your light isn't performative, it's grounded. You don't flinch when the room gets heavy, you lean in. And that change sends a different message into the field. One that says, I'm not running anymore. That's when they come closer. Demons, as you were taught to fear them, are not mindless tormentors. The ones that approach you now are not chaotic attachments or parasitic entities feeding on wounds. They're different, older, more intelligent, less reactive. These are watchers, scouts, guardians of thresholds. Their presence feels colder, more ancient, not hateful, neutral, measured. And when they enter your field, they're not barging in, they're scanning. Not through vision, but through frequency. They don't want your attention, they want your structure. They want to know, is this one stable? Is this one ready to stand in their truth, no matter the cost? This is where most people misunderstand what's happening. They think the presence of these beings means they've attracted something dark or dangerous. But in reality, it means they've reached a vibrational threshold, a level of energetic consistency that makes them noticeable to intelligences beyond polarity. These beings don't serve the dark or the light, they serve law, energetic law. And that law says, when a human becomes coherent enough, they become eligible for contact. But contact doesn't look the way you'd expect. There are no grand ceremonies, no booming voices, no dramatic revelations. The initiation is subtle, it's quiet, it's non-verbal. It begins with the felt sense of being watched, not from a distance, but from within the field. You wake up and feel something observing your thoughts. You sit in meditation and sense a presence waiting for you to flinch. You walk through the world and start noticing symbols repeating, patterns echoing, dreams looping, not by accident, but by design. These are not signs of haunting, they are signatures of scanning. And the scanning is not to evaluate your worth, it's to gauge your stability, because these beings will not co-create with a vessel that is unstable. Not because they're punishing you, but because your incoherence would corrupt the transmission. You cannot channel high-frequency intelligence through a shattered container. You must be sealed, whole, clear. That's what they're looking for. Not perfection, integrity. At this level, intention means very little. Energy is everything. You could say all the right things, wear all the spiritual symbols, practice every ritual you've learned, but if your energy is still split, still leaking, still fragmented by fear and unprocessed pain, they will not engage. They may linger, they may observe, but they will not step in, because to work with you would violate the law of resonance. They don't initiate based on desire, they initiate based on readiness. And readiness is not about knowledge, it's about embodiment. Do you walk your truth when no one's looking? Do you speak with clarity even when it costs you approval? Do you carry silence like a blade, not to wound, but to discern? These are the qualities they watch for. And when they see it, when your field holds firm under observation, they move in closer, not to test, to initiate. But this initiation doesn't come with a scroll or a ceremony, it comes as pressure. A sudden intensification of energy in your space, a dream that feels more real than waking life. An encounter where your emotions spike for no reason, as if your system is being stimulated from outside your own psychology. That's not malfunction. That's energetic scouting. They're pressing on your frequency to see what remains when you're underweight. They want to know if your structure holds. And if it does, if your field stays coherent, even as your nervous system trembles, even as your mind scrambles to make sense of what's happening, then something begins to shift, the presence changes. It no longer feels invasive, it feels magnetic. You stop feeling stalked and start feeling chosen. Not because you're better than others, but because you've become readable. Your signal has become clear enough to register as a potential node, a collaborator, a bridge. Because that's what they're looking for, bridges. People who can hold enough multidimensional coherence to transmit codes into the collective without distortion. These beings are not concerned with your comfort. They are concerned with alignment. They don't care how many followers you have, how many books you've read, or how many meditations you've completed. They care whether your energy holds its shape when you're squeezed, whether your silence is as structured as your speech, whether you've made peace with every part of yourself, including the ones you once labeled demonic. This is why they approach the chosen. Not because you've passed every test, but because you've stopped hiding. They are not looking for saints. They are looking for initiates. For those who've walked through their own darkness and come out the other side, not purified, but integrated. You don't have to be perfect, you have to be whole. So when you feel them again, when the air thickens and your dreams turn to symbols and your body begins to hum with a frequency you can't trace, don't panic, don't resist, listen, feel, Observe. They're not there to scare you. They're there to confirm what you already know deep down. You've crossed a threshold. You've become legible. The field sees you now, and it's waiting to see if you'll remain steady under its gaze. This is not a reward. It's a responsibility, to hold the signal, to stay in coherence, to become the bridge they can build through. You've already begun the initiation. The only question now is, will you complete it? Because they won't make the decision for you. They'll watch. They'll wait. And if you stay stable, if you continue to walk with awareness, with integrity, with inner stillness, even in the presence of their intensity, they will come even closer, not to test, to transmit. What if I told you that the most powerful form of protection isn't light shields or spiritual mantras, it's radical ownership of your shadow? That what keeps you safe isn't how much light you emit, but how little you suppress, not because darkness is evil, but because the energy you exile becomes food for whatever can sense it. Demons, as you've come to understand them, are not creatures of myth waiting to drag you into suffering. They are intelligent frequencies responding to your incoherence. And the only thing they can latch onto, the only thing they can truly feed on, is the energy you've disowned, the parts of yourself you pretend aren't there. That is why integration is not just healing, it is immunity. You've been taught to fight the dark, to banish it, to surround yourself with white light, and in moments of fear, that might feel like the right move, but those defenses are temporary, they're reactive. Because what you defend against, you still fear. And what you fear, you unconsciously give power to. So the more you try to repel these energies, the more tangled you become in their orbit, not because they overpower you, but because you are feeding them through your avoidance. Suppression is a leak. Every part of yourself you exile becomes an open channel, and that's where they enter, not by force, but by invitation, because energy respects resonance more than intention. And if the frequency of shame or fear is active in your field, it will attract a match, no matter how much light you visualize. This is why integration is the real protection. When you own your darkness, no one can weaponize it against you. When you claim your anger, your lust, your grief, your jealousy, when you stop disowning the parts of you that don't fit your spiritual image, you seal the openings in your field. Your energy stops flickering with contradiction. It becomes stable, coherent, whole. And that coherence is what makes you unfed, not invincible, not untouchable, but unappetizing. Because beings that feed on fragmentation have no leverage when there's nothing left unclaimed inside you. Think about that for a moment. Every time you judge a part of yourself as bad, every time you lock away your pain or suppress your rage, you split your energy. And in that split, you become energetically readable. It's like walking into a forest with open wounds. The predators aren't attacking you because they hate you. They're responding to blood in the water. Your unprocessed trauma is the scent. Your emotional denial is the signal. Not because you're evil, because you're leaking. But when you turn inward and face the places you've been taught to hide, something shifts. Not in theory, but in your actual vibrational architecture. Your field begins to reorganize. That sharp inner voice that once shamed you softens. The fear you avoided begins to dissolve. The memories you couldn't look at become doorways instead of traps. And as you integrate each layer, your frequency changes. You stop broadcasting confusion. You stop leaking pain disguised as light. You stop needing to defend yourself, because there's nothing left to defend. There's just you, present, whole, seen. Demons don't feed on evil. They feed on disowned power, on the energy you reject within yourself, because that energy becomes unstable, like pressure building in a sealed pipe. And eventually, it has to move. So it leaks through unconscious behavior, through projection, through physical symptoms. And that's when you attract things, not out of bad luck, but out of energetic honesty. You draw in what matches the shadow you're not willing to meet. But when you meet it, when you sit with it, breathe with it, stop flinching at its shape, you reclaim the energy inside it, you transmute the charge. And in that transmutation, you become less reactive, more anchored. You no longer fear what rises in the dark, because you recognize it. It's not foreign, it's not demonic, it's yours. And when it's yours, it loses its ability to control you. You don't become immune to darkness by rising above it. You become immune by integrating it, by making peace with every frequency in your being. That doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It means being honest about its presence. Honesty is coherence. Coherence is clarity. And clarity is impenetrable. When your field becomes that clear, you stop attracting tests. Because there's nothing left to test. The lesson has already been learned. You've probably noticed this already. The more you accept your darkness, the less haunted you feel. The more shadow work you do, the less often you feel the need to spiritually defend yourself. That's not because the world got lighter, it's because you did. Not lighter in brightness, but lighter in weight, in burden, in resistance. You carry less fragmentation, and so there's less for others, seen or unseen, to poke at. Real spiritual maturity is not about how high you can go. It's about how deep you're willing to dive. Can you sit with your shame and listen to what it's been trying to teach you? Can you hold space for your jealousy without moralizing it? Can you feel your rage and not be afraid it will destroy you? Every time you answer yes to those questions, you close a doorway. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. The understanding that what you own cannot be used against you. And that's the secret. What you own, they cannot feed on. Not because you've hidden it well, but because you've alchemized it. You've taken the raw material of your shadow and shaped it into wisdom. And wisdom cannot be consumed. It radiates, it commands, it reorganizes the space around it. It creates an atmosphere that doesn't require protection, because there's no war happening inside to reflect outward. This is why some people walk through spiritual fire and remain untouched, not because they are shielded, but because they are sealed. Their energy does not tremble in the presence of darkness. It harmonizes with it, not by becoming it, but by no longer fearing it. And that fearlessness is magnetic. It sends a signal. This being cannot be manipulated through shame. This being cannot be twisted through guilt. This being knows who they are. That's what you're becoming. Someone who doesn't need to fight off what others fear, because you no longer carry the hooks those forces latch onto. You don't deny the shadow. You've integrated it. And in that integration, you've found immunity, not through separation, but through wholeness. So if you've been asking how to protect yourself, the answer is simple, but not easy. Stop running. Start claiming. Turn and face what you've labeled unworthy, unlovable, unclean. And when you embrace it, not as a flaw, but as a facet, you'll feel it. That shift, that seal, that stillness in your field that says, I am not hiding anymore. And when you're no longer hiding from yourself, nothing outside of you has anywhere left to hide either. That's not just protection. That's freedom. What if I told you that the very force you once feared, what you called a predator, is now orbiting you, not as a threat, but as a potential partner? Not because it has changed its nature, not because it suddenly feels compassion or warmth toward you, but because it recognizes something in your field that wasn't there before. Structure, coherence, authority. And in the realm of energy, structure is law. These beings do not operate on emotion. They do not care in the human sense. They respond to design. They obey form. And when you become structured, when your energy stabilizes to a point where your frequency no longer flickers with fear or fragmentation, they no longer see you as prey. They see you as a pattern, a node, a signal, and under the laws they obey, that changes everything. Energetic entities are not governed by sentimentality. They don't serve or destroy out of personal vendettas. They are functional intelligences, responding to the architecture of the energy field they encounter. If your field is disorganized, they mirror chaos. If your field is fearful, they amplify it. If your field is incoherent, they provoke confusion. But when your field is integrated, when every shadow has been met and metabolized, when your presence emits clarity rather than conflict, then even the so-called predators recalibrate their relationship to you. They don't do this out of affection. They do it because structure changes the terms. You've likely spent a lifetime trying to push these energies away. You've fought them, feared them, tried to banish them with rituals, prayers, affirmations. And maybe, for a time, that seemed to work. But it always came back. The presence, the pattern, the pressure. Because what you were trying to repel was not external. It was entangled with the parts of you still unresolved. And as long as your internal structure was fragmented, the predator would respond, not as punishment, but as a mirror. But something changed. You stopped resisting and started integrating. You stopped performing light and started embodying wholeness. You went into the underworld of your own psyche and made peace with the monsters there. You reclaimed your shame, your rage, your desire, your grief. You didn't transcend them, you transmuted them. And in doing so, your frequency began to settle. It stopped spiking and crashing. It began to hum with a resonance that these beings recognize, not as a meal, but as a system. Something they can interface with, something they can work with. Sovereignty isn't just a concept, it's a vibrational reality. When your energy stops asking for validation, for rescue, for approval, when it stops leaking into the past or projecting into the future, when it becomes a closed circuit of awareness, grounded in presence and forged through integration, that field becomes magnetic, not seductive, not needy, magnetic. And magnetism rewrites the hierarchy. A sovereign being is not a threat to the predator. But they are not food either. They become something else, something useful. Because, in the larger system of energy and evolution, entities are drawn to purpose. And when you are aligned, when your presence broadcasts stability and direction, you begin to attract not only challenge, but cooperation. Not because they like you, because they sense utility. That's when the dynamic shifts. What once pursued you now orbits you. What once tried to fragment you now becomes part of your ecosystem. Again, not through emotional conversion, but through structural alignment. The predator becomes a partner, not in love, not in friendship, but in function. Your integrity becomes a point of calibration, and these beings begin to work with you, not against you. It's a strange concept to accept, especially if you've spent years spiritualizing the battle between light and dark. But the higher you rise in frequency while staying anchored in your shadow, the more you begin to see that duality was always a training program, a stage. And once you pass it, once your energy field stabilizes beyond polarity, you begin to operate at the level where relationships are not built on like and dislike, but on resonance and law. The truth is, these beings recognize usefulness. And when your path begins to shape timelines, when your decisions ripple across collective structures, when your words hold weight beyond the moment, then even the predators take notice. Because in the architecture of spiritual ecology, power without structure is a threat, but power with structure is a signal, a node, a stable point in a shifting grid. And the system, seen and unseen, values that. This is why shadow-forged individuals become key players. Not because they have conquered darkness, but because they have made peace with it. They no longer react. They respond. They no longer fear being tested. They welcome it, because they know that every test clarifies the design. Every pressure reveals where the structure still leaks. And so they walk with presence, not because they are trying to prove anything, but because their presence is the result of everything they've already survived. And in that presence, alliances begin to form. Strange alliances, unspoken, unritualized, unseen by the outer eye, but undeniable in the energetic field. These beings, once perceived as enemies, become collaborators. They offer information, presence, even protection, not because they love you, because the system they obey recognizes what you've become. Assistance, at this level, is not personal, it's vibrational. These entities do not rescue, they respond to resonance. If your field emits clarity, they may align to that. If your mission serves a larger restructuring of reality, they may reinforce it. But they will not flatter you. They do not care about your story. They care about your frequency, and your frequency is not your words or your aspirations. It is your structure. It is the sum total of your integration. That is what they respect. So when you sense them now, when you feel the presence but no longer the threat, when you hear the whisper but no longer the fear, understand what's happened. You didn't change them. You changed your field. And in doing so, you redefined the relationship. You became stable. And stability, in a world built on chaos, is a gravitational force. That force does not beg, it does not chase, it does not perform. It commands through coherence. And in that command, even the predator steps back, not in submission, but in recognition. Because in the end, the system they serve is not chaos, it's balance. And balance always honors structure. You've become something else now, not untouchable, not holy, but integrated. And in that integration, you've become useful to forces that once only tested you. You've become a partner, not in story, but in structure. And that is where the real power begins. Energetic system, a raven on your windowsill, a song lyric repeating for days, the same number sequence showing up in the clock, the receipt, the address. These aren't signs in the fluffy feel-good sense. They are probes, pings. They are tests of recognition, and your response determines what happens next. If you ignore it, the pattern repeats. If you panic, the energy intensifies. But if you pause, if you feel into it, if you recognize the emotional fingerprint behind it, then the loop shifts. These loops are everywhere for the chosen. You might notice you keep attracting the same kind of relationship dynamic, the same wound in different faces, the same opportunity disguised as failure, again and again. That's not karma in the punishment sense. That's communication. That's your soul attempting to stabilize a code through repetition. And the entities watching, those you once feared as demons, they use that loop as a gauge. They aren't interested in your struggle. They're interested in your signal. And every time you meet the loop with a new level of awareness, your frequency upgrades. Every time you react the same way, the loop resets. Not because they are punishing you, but because they are waiting for clarity, waiting for coherence. The loop is the classroom, but it's non-linear. You won't get a syllabus. You won't know when the test is coming. You won't even know which subject you're being examined on until you're neck deep in the emotional pattern. That's the point. It's not about intellectual preparation. It's about embodied presence. These entities don't care how much you know. They care about how you are. They watch how you respond to subtle pressure. Do you collapse into victimhood? Do you numb out? Or do you breathe, stay aware, and notice the pattern forming before your eyes? Synchronicities are not gifts from the universe. They're signals from the architecture. They're how the system checks if you're awake. You start noticing a symbol over and over, an owl, for example, and at first it feels interesting. Then it feels eerie. Then you realize it's attached to a certain emotion. Maybe it appears every time you doubt yourself, or every time you're on the edge of breakthrough. That's not coincidence. That's a code. That's the system mapping your internal weather and mirroring it externally to get your attention. Demons, in the truest sense, do not speak in growls and threats. They speak in rhythm, in repetition, in pattern. They are pattern masters. They exist within the field as testers of coherence. They don't break through your defenses. They test the places where your defenses already leak. And they do it through the loop. Not once, not twice, over and over, until your soul responds differently. Until your field holds under pressure. Until the lesson becomes embodiment. Think about how often you've said, "Why does this keep happening to me?" That question is the doorway. That is the first glimmer of recognition that something is looping. The next level isn't about blaming the pattern, it's about listening to it. The loop is not there to torment you. It's there to give you another chance to respond from wholeness instead of fragmentation. Every time it repeats, you are being offered access to another level of sovereignty, if you can see it. But you won't see it with your eyes, you'll feel it. The symbols come first, then the emotions, then the thoughts, then the outer events. That's the order. But because most people only pay attention to what's external, they miss the invitation. They fight the people instead of the pattern. They wrestle with the story instead of the signal. And so the loop continues, not because they're being punished, but because they haven't stabilized the frequency shift the pattern is trying to create. These entities do not whisper in words. They don't care about language. They respond to structure. So, if your energy structure remains reactive and fragmented, they keep testing it, not to be cruel, but because your field is unstable. But when your energy begins to crystallize, when your responses become slower, more intentional, when you stop judging the loop and start observing it, something begins to shift. You become less of a target and more of a transmitter. You no longer exist inside the loop, you begin to reprogram it. That's when synchronicities change their flavor. They stop feeling like warnings and start feeling like confirmations. You'll see a number and feel peace instead of panic. You'll notice a symbol and feel alignment instead of confusion. Because now you're speaking the language, not fluently, perhaps, but coherently. And coherence is the key. The loop is your training ground. The pattern is your mentor. And the repetition is not a punishment, it is a rhythm, one that you must learn to dance with if you are to step fully into your chosen path. This isn't about decoding symbols with your intellect, it's about feeling their resonance in your field and allowing them to rewire your perception. When you reach this level, you begin to notice how tightly everything is woven, how one word in a conversation echoes a phrase in a dream which mirrors an emotion from 10 years ago. That's not randomness. That's the architecture showing you that time is not linear, that your healing doesn't move forward, it moves inward. And these entities, these once feared demons, are not blocking your path. They are the keepers of the curriculum, and they only advance those who can read the pattern without getting lost in the story. So if you're looping, emotionally, symbolically, experientially, pause, look closer, not with your eyes, but with your nervous system. What is being repeated? What emotion always shows up right before the loop resets? What symbol always precedes the fall or the breakthrough? Those are your breadcrumbs. That is the language you're learning to read. And as you learn it, you'll begin to realize something powerful. These tests aren't personal, they're structural. These loops aren't prisons, they're invitations. And the entities within them, they're not enemies, they're initiators, speaking not in words, but in frequencies, not in commands, but in code. Your job is not to escape the loop. Your job is to become the one who sees it as it forms, and in seeing it, reshape it. That's what the chosen do. They don't walk a straight line. They spiral, higher, deeper, clearer, with every turn of the loop, and eventually, they stop fearing the pattern and start partnering with it. Not because it's easy, because it's encoded in their path. And so is this. Every symbol is a door, every loop is a lesson, and every demon in disguise is a mirror waiting to see if you finally remember who you really are. What if I told you that every strange symbol, every repeating number, every odd coincidence you've experienced